They were 78 and 79 years old, abandoned by the children they sacrificed everything for, huddled in a crumbling log cabin buried under snow when they lifted the trapdoor in the kitchen floor and discovered $275 million hidden in the root cellar below. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind howled through the cracks of the small apartment like it was searching for something to take. Margaret Hayes sat at the edge of the worn couch, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the phone on the coffee table. It hadn't rung in 6 months. Not once. She knew because she checked the ringer every morning just to make sure it still worked. It did. Her children just didn't call. Beside her, Robert shifted in his recliner, the one with the duct tape holding the armrest together. His breathing was labored tonight, each inhale a little harder than the last. The cold didn't help. The landlord had promised to fix the heater 3 weeks ago, but promises in places like this were just polite lies. Margaret pulled the Afghan tighter around her shoulders. It was the same one her daughter Lisa had given her 15 years ago, back when Lisa still came home for Christmas. Back when the grandkids still ran through the house shouting grandma and tackled Robert for piggyback rides he could barely manage even then. Those days felt like somebody else's life now. Outside, the Montana snow fell heavy and relentless, the kind of snow that buried things. Roads, cars, hopes. Margaret stood slowly, her knees protesting, and walked to the window. The streetlight flickered against the white blanket covering everything. Their old sedan sat in the parking lot, half buried, the check engine light probably still glowing under the hood like a tiny scream for help. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Robert's voice came soft from behind her. "You okay, Maggie?" She didn't turn around. "Just tired, Bobby." He didn't ask what kind of tired. He already knew. It was the kind that sleep didn't fix, the kind that came from being forgotten by the people you loved most in the world. Margaret Hayes was 78 years old. She had raised 3 children in a 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of Billings. She had worked double shifts at the cannery while Robert worked at the garage. They had saved every penny, skipped vacations, wore clothes until they fell apart, all so their kids could go to college. And they did. Lisa went to Seattle for nursing school. James went to Denver for business. Patricia went to Chicago for law. All 3 graduated. All 3 built lives. And all 3 stopped coming home. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. First, it was missing Thanksgiving because of work. Then Christmas because of the kids' schedules. Then birthdays. Then calls became texts. Then texts became silence. Margaret had tried. God knows she tried. She sent cards with $5 bills tucked inside for the grandchildren. She left voicemails that went unreturned. She even flew to Seattle once, spent the last of her savings on a ticket, showed up at Lisa's house unannounced. Lisa had answered the door in yoga pants and a tight smile. "Mum, you should have called first. We're so busy right now." Margaret had stood on that porch for 11 minutes while Lisa explained why it wasn't a good time. She never went back. Robert had his first heart attack 3 years ago. Margaret called all 3 kids from the hospital. James said he'd try to make it out, but never did. Patricia sent flowers with a card signed by her assistant. Lisa didn't respond at all. Robert survived, but something in him died anyway. He stopped asking about the kids after that. Stopped wondering out loud why they didn't visit. He just sat in his recliner and watched old westerns with the volume too high because his hearing was going and they couldn't afford the good hearing aids. Now, in the winter of 2025, Margaret and Robert were facing eviction. The landlord had handed them the notice 4 days ago. 60 days to vacate. The rent had gone up again, and their social security didn't stretch far enough anymore. Margaret still worked part-time at Lorraine's Diner downtown, pouring coffee and serving eggs to truckers and travelers passing through. Her feet ached every night, Her back screamed. But the $200 a week kept them fed. Barely. She turned from the window and looked at Robert. His face was pale, thinner than it used to be. The man who once lifted engines out of cars with his bare hands now struggled to lift himself out of a chair. "You take your medicine today?" she asked. He nodded. All of it. She didn't believe him, but didn't push. What was the point? The pills cost more than they could afford anyway. Half the time they split doses just to make the bottles last. Margaret walked to the tiny kitchen and opened the cabinet. 2 cans of soup, a box of crackers, a jar of peanut butter with maybe 2 spoonfuls left. She closed the cabinet and leaned against the counter. Her reflection stared back at her in the window above the sink. An old woman, worn out, invisible. She wondered when that happened. When she stopped being Maggie, the girl who danced in Robert's arms at the county fair. When she stopped being Mom, the woman who bandaged knees and read bedtime stories. Now she was just a burden, a name her children avoided, a voice they didn't want to hear. The next morning, Margaret walked to the diner through 6 inches of fresh snow. The bus wasn't running again. Budget cuts. She didn't mind the walk. It gave her time to think, or maybe time to not think, to just move, to just survive. Lorraine met her at the door with a cup of coffee already poured. "You look like hell, Maggie." "Thanks, Lorraine. Always know how to make a girl feel special." Lorraine smiled, but her eyes were sad. She knew. Everybody in town knew. The Hayes couple. Used to have kids. Don't see them anymore. Shame. Margaret tied her apron and started her shift. The diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee. The regulars nodded at her. Some left extra tips even though the service wasn't anything special. Pity tips. She took them anyway. Pride didn't pay rent. Around 10 in the morning, an old man named Carl sat at the counter. He was a fixture in town, somewhere in his 80s, still driving his pickup, still wearing the same flannel jacket he'd probably owned since 1975. He ordered eggs and toast, same as always. Margaret poured his coffee. "How you doing, Carl?" He shrugged. "Old. You?" "Same." He chuckled, then looked at her with those sharp eyes that saw too much. "Heard you and Bobby got an eviction notice. Word travels." Margaret didn't respond, just wiped the counter. Carl sipped his coffee. "You know, there's places up in the pass. Old cabins, abandoned. Nobody's lived in them for decades." Margaret paused. "What are you talking about?" He shrugged again. "Just saying. Winter's hard. People need shelter. Some of those places still got roofs, still got fireplaces." She stared at him. "You telling me to squat in some abandoned cabin? I'm telling you there's options, if you know where to look." Margaret thought about it all day. By the time her shift ended, the idea had burrowed into her mind like a tick. She walked home through the snow, her breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Robert was asleep in his chair when she came in. She didn't wake him, just sat down on the couch and stared at the eviction notice pinned to the corkboard in the kitchen. 60 days. Then what? A shelter? The streets? Her children's homes, begging for a room they'd never offer? That night, she told Robert what Carl had said. He listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You really want to go looking for some falling-down shack in the middle of nowhere?" She met his eyes. "You got a better idea?" He didn't. 2 days later, they loaded what little they had into the trunk of their dying sedan. Clothes, blankets, a box of canned food Margaret had been saving, Robert's medications, a flashlight, an old hunting knife Robert's father had given him 50 years ago. They left the apartment keys on the counter. Didn't tell the landlord. Didn't tell anyone. Just left. The car coughed to life on the 3rd try. Margaret gripped the wheel, her hands shaking. Robert sat beside her, staring straight ahead. "Where are we going?" he asked. She put the car in drive. Up. The road into the mountains was barely visible under the snow. The forecast called for another storm by evening. Margaret drove slowly, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the fat flakes falling from the sky. They passed through town, past the diner, past the church where they'd been married 56 years ago, past the school where their kids had learned to read. None of it felt like home anymore. It all felt like evidence of a life that had moved on without them. The highway narrowed as they climbed. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches heavy with snow. The car slipped twice. Robert grabbed the dashboard but didn't say anything. He trusted her. He always had. Even now. Even when they were driving into the middle of nowhere with no plan and no hope. Just desperation dressed up as courage. Margaret's mind drifted as she drove. She thought about James's 8th birthday. They'd saved for months to buy him that bike, a red Schwinn with white handlebars. He'd ridden it every day for 2 years. Did he remember? Did he ever think about the sacrifices? Or had all of that been erased by his corner office in Denver and his kids in private school? She thought about Patricia's law school graduation. Robert had been so proud. He'd worn his only suit, the one he got married in, even though it didn't fit right anymore. Patricia had barely looked at them during the ceremony, too busy networking, too busy becoming someone important, someone too important for her parents. The snow fell harder. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Margaret leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. She was about to pull over to admit this was insane when she saw it. Just a shadow at first, a shape that didn't belong to the trees. She slowed the car. "Bobby, you see that?" Robert leaned forward. "See what?" "There." She pointed. Through the wall of white, barely visible, stood the outline of a structure. A cabin. Margaret's heart pounded. She turned the wheel and the car lurched off the road into what might have been a driveway decades ago. The sedan groaned, tires spinning, but it pushed through. She stopped about 30 feet from the cabin and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just stared. The cabin was buried. Snow piled against the walls, halfway up the windows. The roof sagged in places but held. The chimney stood tall and dark against the pale sky. No smoke, no lights, no tracks in the snow, nothing to suggest anyone had been here in years, maybe decades. "This is crazy," Robert said quietly. "I know," Margaret replied, but she opened the door anyway. The cold hit like a fist. Margaret pulled her coat tight and stepped into snow that came up to her knees. Robert followed, slower, his breath coming in ragged puffs. They waded toward the cabin, every step an effort. The front door was frozen shut. Margaret tried the handle, locked. She looked at Robert. He pulled the hunting knife from his pocket and handed it to her. She wedged it into the frame and pried. The wood cracked. The door didn't budge. She tried again, again. On the 4th try, something gave. The door swung inward with a groan that sounded almost alive. Inside, darkness. Margaret pulled out the flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a room untouched by time. Dust covered everything. Furniture sat exactly where it had been left. A couch, a table, chairs, a stone fireplace against the far wall. The air smelled stale but dry. No rot, no mold, just age. Robert stepped in behind her and closed the door. The wind immediately quieted. The silence was heavy. Margaret swept the flashlight across the room. On the mantel above the fireplace sat framed photographs. A family, a man, a woman, 2 children, all smiling, all frozen in some moment from the past. She stepped closer. The photos were old, faded, the kind taken with cameras that required film and patience. "Who lived here?" Robert asked. Margaret picked up one of the frames. The dust came off on her fingers. "I don't know, but they've been gone a long time." She set the photo down and moved through the cabin slowly. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a wood stove, a bathroom with a pump sink, no electricity, no running water. But the structure was solid. The walls were thick. The windows, though dirty, were intact. "This could work," she said. Robert didn't argue. They spent the next hour making the place livable. Robert gathered wood from a pile stacked against the back wall, protected from the elements by an overhang. The logs were old but dry. He built a fire in the stone fireplace while Margaret swept dust and cleared surfaces. When the fire caught, the warmth spread slowly, cautiously, like it wasn't sure it was allowed. They stood in front of it, hands outstretched, bodies trembling. The heat felt like forgiveness. That night, they ate soup heated over the fire. They didn't talk much, just listened to the wind outside and the crackle of burning wood. When it was time to sleep, they dragged the couch closer to the fireplace and covered themselves with every blanket they'd brought. Robert held Margaret the way he used to when they were young, when the world was full of possibility instead of pain. "You scared?" he whispered. She nodded against his chest. "Me too," he said, "but at least we're scared together." Margaret didn't sleep right away. She stared at the ceiling, watching shadows dance in the firelight. She thought about their children, wondered if they'd noticed their parents were gone yet. Probably not. Lisa was busy with her nursing shifts and her Pilates classes. James was busy with his quarterly reports and his golf league. Patricia was busy with her cases and her book club. None of them had time to notice two old people disappearing into the Montana wilderness. None of them had time to care, and maybe that was okay. Maybe this was better. Maybe being forgotten was a kind of freedom. No more waiting for phone calls that wouldn't come. No more pretending it didn't hurt. No more birthday cards returned to sender. Just her and Robert. Just survival. Just the quiet dignity of two people who'd loved hard and lost harder. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of the fire pull her under. Tomorrow they'd figure out what came next. Tonight, they'd just rest. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the dirty windows in pale golden streaks. Margaret woke first, her body stiff, her breath visible in the cold air. The fire had died down to embers. She stood slowly, every joint protesting, and added more wood. The flames climbed back to life. Robert stirred on the couch, coughing. She brought him water from the bottles they'd packed. He drank slowly, his hands shaking. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, but his eyes said otherwise. She didn't push. After a breakfast of crackers and peanut butter, Margaret decided to explore. The cabin was bigger than she'd thought. In the daylight, she could see details she'd missed. Hand-carved molding, a bookshelf filled with old paperbacks, a wool rug under the table, faded but still intact. Someone had loved this place once. Someone had built a life here. She walked into the kitchen and ran her hand along the counter. The wood was smooth, worn by years of use. She opened the cabinets, empty except for a few mason jars and a tin of coffee so old it had probably turned to dust inside. Then she noticed the floor. Most of it was rough wood planks, uneven and aged. But in the center of the kitchen there was a rug, a braided rug, circular, about 4 feet across. It didn't match the rest of the room, didn't fit the aesthetic. Margaret crouched down and touched it. The fibers were coarse, utilitarian. She frowned. Why would someone put a rug right here? Right in the middle of the kitchen where people walked the most. She grabbed the edge and pulled. The rug slid easily, too easily. Underneath, the floorboards looked different, newer, or at least less worn. And there, in the center, was a seam, a rectangular outline. Margaret's heart began to pound. "Bobby!" she called. Robert appeared in the doorway. "What? Come here, look at this!" He knelt beside her, his knees cracking. "What am I looking at?" She traced the seam with her finger. "It's a door, a trapdoor." Robert stared at it, then at her. "You think there's a cellar? Only one way to find out." She dug her fingers into the seam, searching for a grip. Robert joined her. Together they pried at the edges. The wood was swollen, stubborn. Margaret stood and looked around. She grabbed a fork from the drawer and wedged it into the crack. Leverage. She pushed down. The wood groaned, moved. A gap appeared. Robert slid his fingers in and pulled. With a crack that echoed through the cabin, the trapdoor lifted. Beneath it, darkness and a ladder. Margaret grabbed the flashlight and shone it down. Wooden rungs descended into a space she couldn't see the bottom of. The air that rose from below was cool and smelled like earth. And something else. Something metallic. Robert looked at her. "You going down there?" She looked back at him. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing. Every instinct told her to close the door and walk away. But she'd spent the last 3 years being abandoned, being invisible, being nothing. And maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to be something again, even if that something was just curious, even if that something was just alive. "Yeah," she said, "I'm going down." Margaret stepped onto the first rung. The wood creaked under her weight but held. She descended slowly, the flashlight gripped between her teeth, both hands on the ladder. Behind her, Robert's voice came worried and thin. "Maggie, be careful." She didn't answer, couldn't with the flashlight in her mouth. The darkness wrapped around her like cold water. 1 rung, 2, 3. Her boots found solid ground. She pulled the flashlight from her mouth and swept the beam across the space. It was a cellar, but not like any cellar she'd ever seen. The walls weren't dirt or rough stone. They were reinforced. Wooden beams lined with what looked like tar paper. The floor was hard-packed earth, but it had been leveled, smoothed. This wasn't some hole dug for storing potatoes. This was engineered, built with purpose. Margaret moved the light slowly. Shelves lined the walls, dozens of them. And on those shelves sat boxes, metal boxes, uniform, organized, stacked with military precision. "Bobby," she called up, "you need to see this." "I can't get down there," his voice came back. "My knees won't make it." She heard the pain in his voice. "The admission. Just tell me what you see." Margaret walked toward the nearest shelf. "Boxes," she said. "A lot of them." "What kind of boxes?" "Metal, like the kind you'd keep important papers in, or ammunition." She reached out and touched one. It was cold, heavy. She tried to lift it, barely budged. These things weigh a ton. She set the flashlight on the shelf, angling it so the beam illuminated the box. Her fingers found the latch. It was stiff, rusted. She worked it back and forth until something gave. The lid popped open with a hiss like the cellar had been holding its breath for decades. Margaret lifted the lid fully and stared. Her brain couldn't process what she was seeing, couldn't make sense of it. Stacks of paper, bundled tight. She reached in and pulled one out. Money, cash, bills bound with rubber bands that crumbled at her touch. $100 bills. She turned the bundle over. The bills looked old, the design different from modern currency. But they were real. She could feel it. Her hands started shaking. She set the bundle down and opened another box. Same thing. Cash. Thousands of dollars. Tens of thousands. She moved to the next shelf, opened another box. Gold coins. They gleamed in the flashlight beam like tiny suns. She picked one up. Heavy. Solid. Real. "Maggie," Robert called down. "What's happening?" "You need to come down here," she said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "I can't. Tell me." She looked around the cellar, at the rows of boxes, at the shelves extending into shadow. "Bobby, I think we found something." "What?" "A fortune." Silence from above. "Then what are you talking about?" She opened another box. Jewelry, necklaces, rings, bracelets. Some looked antique, some looked modern, all looked expensive. Another box, bearer bonds, certificates, papers with numbers that made her dizzy. Another box, more cash, different denominations. 20s, 50s, hundreds, all old, all preserved, all real. Margaret sat down hard on the dirt floor. The flashlight beam shook in her hand. She tried to count boxes but lost track. 30, 40, maybe more. How much was here? How long had it been sitting in this cellar while the world above forgot it existed? "Bobby," she called up. Her voice cracked. "I need you to try. I need you down here. I need to know I'm not losing my mind." She heard him moving above, heard his joints popping, heard his labored breathing. Then his boots appeared on the ladder. He descended one painful rung at a time. When he reached the bottom, she helped him off the ladder. He leaned against the wall, catching his breath. Then he saw the open boxes, saw the money spilling out, saw Margaret's face. "Holy God," he whispered. They stood together in the beam of the flashlight, two old people in a stranger's cellar, staring at wealth they couldn't comprehend. Robert moved to the nearest box and opened it, pulled out a bundle of bills, looked at Margaret, looked back at the money. This can't be real. Margaret opened another box, then another. "It's all real, Bobby. All of it." He sat down beside her. They didn't speak for a long time, just sat in the cold earth with boxes of money surrounding them like they'd fallen into someone else's dream. Finally, Robert said, "How much do you think is here?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know. A lot." He looked at the shelves extending into darkness. More than a lot. Margaret stood and grabbed the flashlight. She walked deeper into the cellar. The space was bigger than she'd thought. It extended under the entire cabin, maybe beyond. More shelves, more boxes. She opened them methodically now, documenting cash, gold, bonds, jewelry, silver bars, rare coins, stamps in protective sleeves, documents she didn't understand. The sheer volume was staggering. Whoever had hidden this had spent years accumulating it, decades maybe, and then buried it here, left it, forgot it, or died. At the far end of the cellar, she found a desk. A small wooden desk with drawers. She tried the top drawer, locked. She tried the others. All locked. She looked around for a key. Nothing. She grabbed a screwdriver from a toolbox on a nearby shelf and pried at the lock. The wood splintered. The drawer opened. Inside were notebooks, ledgers. She pulled one out and opened it. The handwriting was meticulous, small, precise. Dates, amounts, transactions. She flipped to the first page. Property of Samuel Brennan. Started January 4th, 1961. Margaret carried the ledger back to Robert. "Look at this." He squinted at the writing in the dim light. "Who's Samuel Brennan?" "Must be who lived here," she said. She flipped through the pages. The entries went on for years. 1961, 1962, 63. Each page detailed purchases. Gold bought, bonds acquired, cash saved. The amounts grew. Slowly at first, then faster. By 1970, the numbers were staggering. Margaret kept flipping. The entries continued through the 70s, then stopped abruptly in 1982. The final entry read, "Total value estimated $275 million. Secure location confirmed. No heirs, no family. Let the earth keep what the earth provided." Margaret's hands went numb. The ledger slipped from her fingers and hit the dirt floor. 275 million. Robert picked up the ledger. Read the entry himself. Read it again. Looked at Margaret. "This has to be a mistake." She shook her head. "Look around, Bobby. Does this look like a mistake?" He stared at the boxes, at the money visible in the open containers, at the gold glinting in the flashlight beam. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." They sat in silence again, the weight of what they'd found pressing down like the earth above them. Finally, Margaret spoke. "What do we do?" Robert didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was small. "I don't know. Can we even touch this? Is it legal?" She looked at him. "We're squatting in an abandoned cabin. We broke in through a window. Legal might not be our strongest position." He almost smiled. "Almost. So what? We just leave it?" She thought about that. Thought about the eviction notice. Thought about Robert's medication they couldn't afford. Thought about the diner shifts that destroyed her feet and barely paid for food. Thought about their children who didn't call, who didn't care, Who wouldn't notice if they disappeared? What happens next will turn this night upside down, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest voices carry the most power. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Margaret stood and walked to one of the boxes. She pulled out a single bundle of hundreds, held it in her hand, felt the weight of it. "This is real," she said. "Bobby, this is real money, real gold, real value, and it's been sitting here for 40 years waiting for someone to find it." Robert watched her. His face was pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we were meant to find it. Maybe after everything we've been through, after being abandoned, after being forgotten. Maybe this is the universe saying you matter." He shook his head. "Or maybe it's a test. Maybe it's someone else's money and we're supposed to do the right thing." "And what's the right thing?" she asked. "Turn it over to who? The government? So they can take it and we go back to being evicted and dying slowly in some freezing apartment?" Robert didn't answer. Margaret sat back down beside him. "I'm not saying we keep it all. I'm not saying we become thieves. But Bobby, we have nothing. Our own children threw us away like garbage. And here we are, in this cabin, in this cellar, with enough money to not just survive but to actually live, to get you the medical care you need, to maybe do some good in the world." Her voice broke. "Don't we deserve that? Don't we deserve something after giving everything to people who couldn't care less if we lived or died?" Robert reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, thin, fragile. "Maggie," he said softly. "I'm scared." She squeezed his hand. "Me too. But I'm more scared of going back to how things were, of waiting to die in silence, of being nothing to everyone, including ourselves." They sat holding hands in the dirt while the flashlight beam slowly dimmed. Finally, Robert said, "We sleep on it. We don't make any decisions tonight. We go back upstairs, we rest, and tomorrow with clear heads we figure out what to do." Margaret nodded. Okay. Getting Robert back up the ladder was harder than getting him down. Margaret went first, then reached down to help pull him up rung by rung. By the time they both stood in the kitchen again, they were exhausted, sweating despite the cold. They closed the trapdoor, pulled the rug back over it, stood there breathing hard. The cabin felt different now, charged, like it was watching them, waiting to see what they'd do. That night they barely spoke. Margaret reheated soup over the fire. They ate mechanically, no taste, no hunger, just the motion of survival. When it was time to sleep, they lay on the couch together again. But sleep didn't come. Margaret stared at the ceiling. Her mind raced. $275 million. The number didn't feel real, couldn't be real. People like her and Robert didn't stumble into that kind of money. People like them scraped and suffered and died quietly. That was the deal. That was the world. But what if it wasn't? What if for once, just once, the universe tilted in their favor? She thought about Samuel Brennan, wondered who he'd been, why he'd hidden all that wealth. The ledger said no heirs, no family. Had he been alone like them? Had he built this fortune piece by piece only to realize there was no one to share it with? No one to leave it to? The thought made her sad. All that wealth, all that effort. And in the end, he'd died alone and let it all rot in the ground. Beside her, Robert's breathing was uneven. She knew he wasn't sleeping either. "Bobby," she whispered. "Yeah, you think we're bad people if we keep some of it?" He was quiet for a long time. "Then I think we're desperate people in a desperate situation. And I think whoever Samuel Brennan was, he's been gone for over 40 years. Whatever he wanted for that money, it doesn't matter anymore. Only what we do with it matters now." She turned to look at him in the firelight. "What do you want to do?" He met her eyes. "I want to live, Maggie. Just a little. Just enough to remember what it feels like." She kissed his forehead. "Then we'll live." Morning came too fast and too slow. Margaret woke with her heart already pounding. For a moment she thought maybe she'd dreamed it, the cellar, the money. All of it just her mind playing tricks. But then she saw the rug in the kitchen, saw the way it sat slightly crooked over the trapdoor. Not a dream. Very real. Robert was already awake, sitting at the small kitchen table, staring at nothing. "You okay?" she asked. He shrugged. "Define okay." She smiled despite everything. Fair point. They ate crackers for breakfast, drank water from bottles that were running low. Neither mentioned the cellar. Not yet. Not until they'd had coffee. Margaret found an old percolator in one of the cabinets, filled it with snow melted over the fire, added grounds from the ancient tin she'd found. The coffee that emerged was weak and tasted like rust, but it was warm. It was caffeine. It helped. They sat across from each other at the table, cupped their hands around the chipped mugs. Finally, Robert said, "We need a plan." Margaret nodded. Agreed. What kind of plan? He took a sip, grimaced at the taste. First, we need to know if this is legal, if we can actually claim any of it. Second, we need to know if anyone's looking for it. If Samuel Brennan had family we don't know about, if there's a record of this money somewhere. Third, we need to figure out how to move it without getting arrested or robbed or killed. Margaret listened. Her practical Bobby. Always thinking steps ahead. You're right. So where do we start? He looked toward the trapdoor. We start by going back down there. We catalogue everything. We find out exactly what we have. Then we find a lawyer, someone who can tell us what we're dealing with. She raised an eyebrow. A lawyer costs money. We use some of the money down there. Just enough. If it turns out we can't keep it, we pay it back. And if we can keep it, then we figure out what comes next. They spent the next 3 hours in the cellar. Margaret made lists. Robert opened boxes and called out contents. By noon, they had a rough inventory. 47 boxes total, 23 containing cash in various denominations, 8 containing gold coins and bars, 6 containing jewelry, 5 containing bearer bonds and certificates, 3 containing rare coins and stamps, 2 containing documents and deeds. The estimated total, according to Samuel Brennan's ledger, was $275 million, but that was based on values from 1982. Margaret didn't know what it would be worth now. More? Less? She had no idea. What she did know was this. Even if the real value was 1/10 of that estimate, it was still more money than she'd see in 100 lifetimes. It was still enough to change everything. They climbed back upstairs. Margaret's hands were black with dirt and dust. Her back ached, but her mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in years. "Bobby," she said, "we need to go into town." He looked at her. "Now? Now. We need to file some kind of claim. Need to talk to someone official. Need to get ahead of this before it gets ahead of us." He stood slowly. His knees cracked like gunshots. "All right, let's go." The drive down the mountain was terrifying. The snow had gotten deeper. The car slipped and slid. Twice Margaret thought they'd go off the road, but they made it. The town looked different now, smaller, less significant. They parked in front of the county clerk's office, a squat brick building with bars on the windows. Inside, a woman in her 50s sat behind a desk doing a crossword puzzle. She looked up when they entered. "Help you?" Margaret stepped forward. "We need to file a discovery claim." The woman blinked. "A what?" "A discovery claim. We found something on a property, something valuable. We need to register it." The woman set down her pencil. "What kind of something?" Margaret hesitated. "Old belongings. In an abandoned cabin." The woman pulled out a form. "What's the address of the property?" Margaret gave her the rough location. The woman typed into her computer, frowned. "That property's listed as abandoned. No owner on record since 1983. Belonged to a Samuel Brennan before that. Deceased. No heirs." Margaret's heart jumped. "So legally, what happens to things found there?" The woman shrugged. Depends on what you found. If it's personal property, might fall under finders keepers. If it's something else, might belong to the state. You'd need a lawyer. Robert spoke up. Can you recommend one? The woman thought for a moment. Sarah Collins. Young, sharp. Works out of her house on Maple Street. Handles estate stuff. She might take your case. Margaret thanked her. They filled out the form, signed it, dated it. The woman stamped it and filed it. You're on record now, she said. Whatever you found, you reported it. That counts for something. They left the office, stood on the sidewalk in the cold. Robert looked at Margaret. We really doing this? She looked back at him. We really are. Sarah Collins answered her door in sweatpants and a University of Montana hoodie. She looked about 30, had kind eyes, listened without interrupting as Margaret and Robert explained. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, You understand what you're claiming, right? Margaret nodded. $275 million hidden in a root cellar by a dead man with no heirs. Sarah almost smiled. That's insane. I know, Margaret said. But it's true. Sarah looked at them, really looked, saw their worn clothes, their tired faces, their desperate hope. Okay, she said. I'll take the case, but I need full disclosure. I need to see the property, see the cellar, see the ledger, and I need you to understand that even if everything you're saying is true, there's going to be legal challenges. The state might claim it. Distant relatives might come out of the woodwork. This won't be simple. Margaret met her eyes. Nothing about our lives has ever been simple. Sarah nodded. Fair enough. Let's go see what you found. The drive back up the mountain was quiet. Sarah followed them in her own car, a sensible sedan with good tires. When they reached the cabin, she parked and got out, looked at the structure, whistled low. You've been living here? Margaret nodded. Sarah shook her head. You two are tougher than you look. Inside, Margaret led her to the kitchen, showed her the rug, the trap door. Sarah knelt and examined it. Professional, thorough. Can I go down? Margaret handed her the flashlight. Be my guest. Sarah descended into the cellar. They heard her moving around, heard the boxes opening, heard her sharp intake of breath. She was down there for 20 minutes. When she came back up, her face was pale. Her hands shook slightly. That's real, she said. All of it? Margaret asked. All of it. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, pulled out a notebook, started writing. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. Property is legally abandoned. Owner deceased with no heirs on record. Anything found on the property could be considered treasure trove under Montana law, which means it belongs to the finder. That's you. But, she paused, the state could argue it should go to them. We'll have to fight that. Also, we need to authenticate everything. Make sure it's not stolen, not part of some crime. If it checks out clean, you've got a strong claim. Robert leaned forward. How long will this take? Sarah looked at him. Months. Maybe a year. And it won't be quiet. Once we file the claim officially, it'll go public. Media will show up. People will have opinions. Your life will change. Margaret and Robert looked at each other. Something passed between them. An understanding. Our life already changed, Margaret said. The day our kids stopped calling. This is just a different kind of change. Sarah nodded slowly. All right then, let's make history. Over the next week, Sarah worked fast. She brought in an appraiser. A quiet man named Ed who spent 2 days in the cellar cataloging everything. He confirmed the cash was authentic. The gold was real. The bonds were valid. The jewelry was valuable. His final estimate, adjusted for current values, came to $293 million. Margaret sat down when she heard the number. Robert had to step outside. It was too much. Too big. Too impossible. Sarah filed the official claim. Within hours, the news broke. Elderly couple discovers nearly $300 million in abandoned cabin. The story went viral. National news picked it up. Reporters descended on the small Montana town like locusts. Cameras, microphones, questions shouted from the road. Margaret and Robert stayed inside the cabin. Didn't answer the door, didn't give interviews. Just watched through the windows as their private discovery became public spectacle. And then the phone calls started. Not to them. They didn't have a phone up there, but to Sarah. Dozens of calls, from reporters, from lawyers, from people claiming to be distant relatives of Samuel Brennan. And 3 calls that made Margaret's blood run cold. From her children. Lisa called first. "Mum, I saw the news. Are you okay? Where are you?" Margaret stared at Sarah's phone, listened to her daughter's voice, the same voice that had been silent for 3 years, now suddenly concerned, suddenly caring. She didn't answer. James called next, left a voicemail. "Dad, it's James. Listen, I know things have been hard. I'm sorry, but you need legal representation, real representation. I can help. I know people. Call me back." Margaret deleted it. Patricia called last, her voice tight, controlled. "Mother, Father, this is serious. You need to be careful. People will try to take advantage. You need family right now. We're coming up there. We're going to help you through this." Margaret looked at Robert. "They're coming." He nodded. His face was stone. "I know. What do we do?" She thought about that. Thought about 3 years of silence, 3 years of abandonment, 3 years of feeling worthless and forgotten. Thought about Lisa's tight smile on her doorway in Seattle. Thought about James's empty promises. Thought about Patricia's assistant signed cards. "What do we do?" she repeated. Her voice hardened. "We remind them what it feels like to be ignored." They arrived 3 days later, all 3 of them. Lisa drove up first in a rented SUV with Seattle plates. She pulled up to the cabin mid-morning while Margaret was splitting firewood out front. The sound of the engine made Margaret stop. She stood there, axe in hand, watching as her eldest daughter climbed out of the vehicle. Lisa looked different, older. Her hair was shorter, professionally styled. She wore expensive boots and a North Face jacket that probably cost more than Margaret's monthly Social Security check. "Mom?" Lisa said. Her voice cracked. "Oh my God, Mom!" She started walking toward Margaret, arms outstretched like she expected a hug, like 3 years of silence could be erased with a single embrace. Margaret didn't move, didn't lower the axe, didn't smile. Lisa stopped a few feet away. Her arms dropped. "Mom, please. I'm so sorry. We saw the news and we've been so worried. We tried calling but couldn't reach you." Margaret's voice came out flat. Cold. "You've had my number for 3 years, Lisa. Funny how you only remembered it when you saw dollar signs on television." Lisa's face crumpled. "That's not fair. I've been busy. You know how demanding nursing is. I wanted to call. I just—" She trailed off. Margaret finished for her. "You just didn't." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. I know I should have been better, but I'm here now. I want to help." Margaret looked at her daughter, really looked at her, saw the guilt, saw the fear, saw something else too. Calculation. "You want to help," Margaret said, "or you want to make sure you get your cut." Lisa stepped back like she'd been slapped. "Mom, no, that's not. How could you think that?" "Because I know you," Margaret said quietly. "I raised you. I know when you're being real and when you're performing. And right now, you're performing." Lisa opened her mouth, closed it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. But before she could respond, another car pulled up, a black Lexus. James climbed out wearing a suit. No tie, his hair was thinning. His face had the soft edges of someone who sat behind a desk all day. Behind him, a woman in a pantsuit emerged, briefcase in hand. "Dad!" James called. He walked past Lisa without acknowledging her. Robert had come to stand in the doorway. He looked at his son, his face unreadable. James stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "This is Karen. She's an attorney. A good one. She can help you navigate this." Robert didn't move. "We have an attorney." James frowned. "Some small-town estate lawyer." "Dad, this is serious. You need someone who handles high-value cases. Someone who knows federal tax law. Someone who can protect you from vultures." Margaret stepped forward, the axe still in her hand. "Funny you should mention vultures, James. Seems like they're already circling." James's face hardened. "I'm trying to help." "Are you?" Margaret asked. "Because I remember the last time you tried to help. When was that again?" "Oh, right. Never. Not when your father had his heart attack. Not when we were facing eviction. Not when I was working myself to death just to keep us fed. But now that there's money involved, here you are, suited up and ready to assist." James's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under. The economy, my job, the kids, their school." Margaret laughed, a harsh sound. "The pressure you've been under? Bobby and I were living in a car 2 weeks ago. We were eating crackers for dinner. We had no heat, no hope. And you were too busy with your economy and your kids to even send a text. So forgive me if I don't want your help now." The attorney, Karen, stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, I understand emotions are high, but your son is right. You need proper representation. This discovery will have significant tax implications, estate considerations, potential challenges from the state." Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Robert. "I'm handling that," she said calmly. "And you are?" Karen asked. "Sarah Collins, their attorney of record." Karen looked her up and down, barely hiding her disdain. "This is beyond your scope." Sarah smiled. "It really isn't. I've already filed the claim, authenticated the assets, and established legal precedent under Montana treasure trove law. But thank you for your concern." Karen's expression soured. James looked at his father. "Dad, please, be reasonable." Robert finally spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. "You want to know what's reasonable, James? Reasonable is calling your parents more than once every 3 years. Reasonable is checking in when they're struggling. Reasonable is giving a damn whether they live or die. You didn't do any of that. So no, I don't think I'll be taking advice on what's reasonable from you." Another car pulled up. Patricia's Mercedes. She emerged like she was stepping onto a stage. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, designer everything. She saw her siblings and her face shifted through several expressions. Surprise, annoyance, then carefully constructed concern. "Mother, Daddy." Her voice was sugar, practiced. She rushed toward them. Margaret held up a hand. "Stop right there, Patricia." Patricia froze. Her smile faltered. "I came as soon as I heard. You must be so overwhelmed." "We're managing," Margaret said. Patricia's eyes darted to the cabin, to the cars parked around it, to the lawyer standing with James. "She's not good enough," Patricia said, pointing at Sarah. "You need someone from a major firm, someone with resources, someone who can protect you from people trying to exploit this situation." Margaret stepped closer to her youngest daughter. "And by people, you mean yourselves?" Patricia's face went pale. "How dare you?" "How dare I?" Margaret's voice rose. "How dare I what, Patricia? Acknowledge that you abandoned us? That you couldn't be bothered to visit? That the last time I saw you, you had your assistant sign my birthday card?" Patricia's composure cracked. "I've been building my career, making something of myself. I didn't have time for—" She stopped herself. But Margaret finished the sentence. "For us. You didn't have time for us, but you have time now that there's something in it for you." Patricia's face twisted. "This is unbelievable. We're your children. You owe us." Margaret felt something break inside her, not her heart. That had broken years ago. Something else. The last thread of obligation. The last whisper of guilt. She looked at her 3 children standing in the snow. Strangers wearing familiar faces. "I owe you," she said quietly. "I gave you everything. Every dollar, every sacrifice, every dream I had, I set aside for you 3. And you paid me back with silence." Her voice grew stronger. You didn't call, didn't visit, didn't care. When your father was dying in a hospital bed, none of you showed up. When we were being evicted, none of you answered your phones. So no, Patricia, I don't owe you a damn thing. The silence that followed was arctic. Lisa was crying openly now. James stared at the ground. Patricia's mask had completely shattered. Her face was red, her hands clenched into fists. This isn't over, Patricia said. Her voice shook. We have rights. We're your legal heirs. That money should. Margaret cut her off. That money was hidden by a man who had no heirs, just like us, and just like him, we'll decide what happens to it, not you. Patricia opened her mouth to argue. Sarah stepped forward. I'd advise you to leave, she said. All of you. You're trespassing on private property, and if you continue to harass my clients, I'll file a restraining order. James looked at the lawyer he'd brought. Karen shrugged. She's right. Legally, you have no standing here until the estate is settled. And even then, she glanced at Sarah. Treasure trove law is tricky. You might not have any claim at all. James turned to his father one more time. Dad, please, don't do this. Don't shut us out. Robert's voice was heavy with pain. We didn't shut you out, son. You walked away, all three of you. We're just finally accepting that you're gone. Lisa sobbed. We're sorry. We're so sorry. We'll do better. Margaret looked at her daughter, saw the desperation, saw the fear, and felt nothing. Sorry doesn't pay back 3 years, Lisa. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering what we did wrong. Sorry doesn't bring back the time we lost. Lisa reached out. Mom, please. We're family. Family, Margaret repeated. She looked at Robert, then at Sarah, then at the cabin behind them. Family is the people who show up, the people who care when there's nothing to gain. You three stopped being family a long time ago. You just didn't notice because we were too polite to say it out loud. Patricia straightened. Fine. Her voice was ice. We'll let the courts decide. She turned and walked back to her Mercedes, slammed the door, drove away without looking back. James followed, his lawyer trailing behind him. Neither said goodbye. Lisa stood there longest, shaking, tears streaming. Mom, she whispered, I really am sorry. I know you don't believe me. But I am. Margaret's face softened just slightly. Maybe you are, she said. But sorry doesn't change anything, not yet. Lisa nodded, wiped her eyes, walked back to her SUV. As she pulled away, Margaret watched until the vehicles disappeared down the mountain road. Then her knees buckled. Robert caught her, held her up. They stood there in the cold, two old people who'd just severed the last ties to their children. It should have felt like victory. It felt like grief. Inside, Sarah made coffee, the real kind she'd brought from town. They sat at the small table. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, Robert said, They'll fight this, won't they? Sarah nodded. Probably. Patricia seems like the type who doesn't give up easily. And James brought a lawyer for a reason. They'll claim you're not of sound mind, that you're being manipulated, that they're entitled to something as your children. Can they win? Margaret asked. Sarah considered. Depends on the judge. Depends on how much evidence we can present of their abandonment. Depends on how clean the provenance of the money is. She paused. But I'll be honest, this is going to get ugly. It already is ugly, Robert said. The media attention intensified. By the next day, the story had evolved. Elderly couple abandoned by children discovers fortune. Reporters dug into public records, found the eviction notice, found hospital records showing Robert's heart attack with no family visitors listed, found interviews with neighbors who confirmed the children never came around. The narrative shifted. Margaret and Robert weren't just lucky treasure hunters. They were victims, abandoned by ungrateful children, now vindicated by fate. The internet exploded. Hashtags appeared. Stand with the Hayes. Team Margaret and Robert. Abandoned but not broken. Thousands of people shared their own stories of family betrayal, of elderly parents left alone, of children too busy for the people who raised them. Support poured in. Letters arrived, care packages, offers of help. A GoFundMe appeared without Margaret's knowledge. Strangers donated to help with legal fees. It raised $30,000 in 48 hours. But the backlash against the children was vicious. Someone leaked James's LinkedIn profile. His company's phone lines were flooded with calls demanding he be fired. Within a week, he was placed on administrative leave. Lisa's nursing supervisor saw the story, started asking questions. Other nurses remembered Lisa talking about her parents years ago, then never mentioning them again. The hospital launched a quiet investigation into whether someone who abandoned their elderly parents should be trusted with vulnerable patients. Patricia had it worst. Her law firm prided itself on family values, corporate responsibility. When partners saw the coverage, saw Patricia crying on camera about her inheritance, saw the evidence of years of neglect, they called an emergency meeting. She was asked to take a leave of absence indefinitely. The children tried to control the damage. James did an interview with a local news station, claimed he'd been busy, that his parents never asked for help. The internet found hospital records showing Margaret had called him 12 times during Robert's heart attack, all calls unreturned. James's interview became a meme, a symbol of entitled children making excuses. Lisa tried a different approach, posted on social media about mental health, about how she'd been struggling with depression, how she'd isolated herself from everyone, including her parents. But her Instagram history was public. Photos of vacations, of spa days, of wine nights with friends, all while her parents froze in an apartment they couldn't afford. The post was ratioed into oblivion. Thousands of comments calling her out, calling her selfish, calling her exactly what she was. Patricia hired a PR firm. They crafted a statement, sincere apology, acknowledgement of mistakes, promise to do better. But the firm dropped her when they realized the extent of the abandonment. Nobody wanted to represent someone who let their parents face eviction while she drove a Mercedes. The children's desperation grew. They hired lawyers, filed motions, claimed elder abuse, claimed Sarah was manipulating their parents, claimed the discovery was suspicious. Maybe Margaret and Robert had stolen the money. Maybe they were hiding something. Every claim was investigated. Every claim was dismissed. The money was clean, authenticated, legal. Margaret and Robert were of sound mind. Multiple doctors confirmed it, and Sarah had documentation of every conversation, every decision, every choice made freely by her clients. Meanwhile, the town of Blue Hollow rallied. Lorraine from the diner organized a support committee. Local mechanics donated their time to fix Margaret and Robert's car. The grocery store delivered food to the cabin, refused payment. The mayor, a woman named Ruth, visited personally, brought firewood, stayed for coffee, told Margaret she was the bravest woman in Montana. People who'd barely known the Hayes before became fiercely protective. Someone spray-painted Margaret's face on the side of the old mill building, made her look like a superhero. Underneath, the words, "Some heroes have greasy hands and tired hearts." Margaret cried when she saw it. The town had seen her, really seen her, in a way her own children never had. But the legal battle intensified. Patricia filed for guardianship, claimed her parents were being financially exploited. The court ordered a hearing. Sarah prepared meticulously, brought evidence. Phone records showing 3 years of unreturned calls, hospital visitor logs showing nobody came, testimony from neighbors, from Lorraine, from the landlord who'd tried to work with Margaret on rent and never heard from any children offering help. The judge was a man in his 70s. He read everything. Looked at Margaret and Robert sitting quiet and dignified in their best clothes. Looked at the 3 children in their expensive outfits, their expensive lawyers. He asked one question. He looked at Patricia. "When was the last time you saw your mother?" Patricia hesitated. "I'm not sure of the exact date. The judge flipped through papers. According to these records, you last saw her 4 years ago at a funeral for your aunt. You stayed for 2 hours, left before the reception ended. Is that accurate? Patricia's face flushed. I had to get back to Chicago. My flight. The judge held up a hand. And in the 4 years since, how many times did you call? Patricia looked at her lawyer. The lawyer said, Your Honor, my client's relationship with her parents is complicated. The judge's expression hardened. Complicated is one word for it. Neglectful is another. He looked at James. You? James cleared his throat. Your Honor, I have a demanding career. 3 children of my own. I did what I could. The judge read from a document. You make $300,000 a year. You own 2 homes. You take 3 vacations annually. And you couldn't find time to visit your parents who were facing eviction. James had no answer. The judge turned to Lisa. Anything to add? Lisa was crying. I was wrong, she whispered. I know I was wrong. I have no excuse. The judge seemed to soften slightly at her honesty. Then he looked at Sarah. These people are claiming their parents are being exploited. Are they? Sarah stood. Your Honor, my clients came to me after discovering a legally abandoned property with legally abandoned assets. I've represented them pro bono because their story moved me, because they deserved someone in their corner. Every decision made has been theirs, every choice informed and documented. They're not being exploited, they're being protected. The judge nodded. He looked at Margaret and Robert. Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Hayes, do you feel you're being manipulated or coerced in any way? Margaret stood, her voice steady. No, Your Honor. For the first time in years we feel like we matter. The judge's eyes glistened. He cleared his throat. Petition for guardianship is denied. He banged his gavel. The children will have no claim to any assets discovered by Mr. and Mrs. Hayes unless the Hayes choose to grant such claim. This court finds no evidence of exploitation, only evidence of long overdue justice. Dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed out to file stories. Patricia's face went white. James looked like he might be sick. Lisa just cried harder. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Margaret and Robert walked out with Sarah. Questions flew. Mrs. Hayes, how do you feel? Margaret stopped, looked at the cameras. I feel seen, she said simply, and that's worth more than any amount of money. What about your children? A reporter shouted. What about them? Margaret replied. They made their choices. Now they have to live with them. Do you plan to give them anything from the discovery? Another reporter asked. Margaret looked at Robert. He nodded. We plan to give them a chance, Margaret said. One chance to prove they care about us as people, not as lottery tickets. If they can do that, if they can show up for a year, really show up, then we'll talk. But earning their way back into our lives comes first. The inheritance can wait. The clip went viral, played on every major network. Margaret Hayes became a symbol, not of wealth, but of dignity, of self-worth, of refusing to let blood relation excuse bad behavior. Support groups formed online. Children of narcissists, abandoned elders, people who'd been discarded by family and told to forgive without accountability. They all rallied behind Margaret. She received thousands of messages. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. Thank you for showing us it's okay to expect better. Margaret read every message she could, cried over most of them. She'd never meant to become a spokesperson, never wanted attention. But if her pain could help others feel less alone, then maybe it meant something. Back at the cabin, life found a rhythm. Sarah handled the legal complexity. Authentication continued. The state tried to challenge the claim, argued the money should go to Montana's general fund. Sarah fought back, cited precedent, cited law, cited the fact that Samuel Brennan's will explicitly stated no heirs and no state claim. The judge ruled in Margaret and Robert's favor. The money was theirs, legally, completely. The news broke on a Tuesday. $293 million awarded to elderly couple. Taxes would take a chunk. But even after everything, they'd have more money than seemed possible, more money than they'd ever dreamed of, more money than they knew what to do with. That night, Margaret and Robert sat by the fire. The cabin was warm now. They'd bought a generator, bought supplies, bought comfort. But they hadn't moved, hadn't left. This place felt right, felt earned. "Bobby," Margaret said, "what do we do now?" Robert stared at the flames. "I think we live," he said. "Really live. Not just survive, not just exist. We live." She took his hand. "What does that look like?" He smiled. "I don't know yet, but we have time to figure it out. Time we didn't have before." Margaret leaned against him, thought about their children, about the year she'd given them, about whether any of them would actually show up. Part of her hoped they would. Part of her had already let them go. Mostly, she thought about Samuel Brennan, about the man who'd hidden a fortune because he had no one to share it with. She understood him now, understood the loneliness, the isolation, the quiet acceptance that some people die alone. But she and Robert weren't alone, not anymore. They had Sarah, had the town, had each other, had purpose, and maybe that was the real treasure, not the money in the cellar, but the proof that they mattered, that their lives had value, that strangers could show more love than blood. That dignity didn't come from what you owned. It came from knowing your worth and refusing to settle for less. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and quiet, covering the world in white. Inside, the fire crackled. Margaret closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten. Peace. Spring came to the Montana mountains like a whisper. Snow melted into streams that rushed down hillsides. Wildflowers pushed through cold earth. The world that had been frozen and white turned green and alive. Margaret stood on the porch of the cabin watching the transformation. 6 months had passed since the court ruling. 6 months since her children had been told they had no legal claim. 6 months since she'd offered them a single chance to earn their way back. Not into the money. Into her life. The cabin had changed too. Robert had hired contractors, local men who'd known hard times and appreciated the work. They'd reinforced the structure, added insulation, installed proper plumbing and electricity from a new solar system and backup generator. The roof was new, the windows replaced, but the character remained. The stone fireplace, the wooden beams, the history. They'd kept Samuel Brennan's desk, his ledger, turned one room into a small museum dedicated to him, the man who'd hidden a fortune and died alone. Margaret felt she owed him that much, a story told, a life remembered. The root cellar had been transformed too, climate-controlled now, secure, the boxes catalogued and stored properly. Most of the money had been moved to banks, to investment accounts managed by professionals Sarah had vetted carefully. But they'd kept some down there, a reminder, a connection to where they'd been, to what they'd found. Sarah visited weekly, had become more than their lawyer. She was family. The daughter they'd gained when they lost the ones they'd raised. She brought groceries, brought updates, brought laughter. She'd refused payment for months until Margaret threatened to fire her. Now she accepted a modest retainer and spent most of it on gifts for them anyway. The town had embraced them fully. Lorraine's diner had a photo of Margaret on the wall now. Under it, a plaque. Our hero. The mayor had declared a Margaret and Robert Hayes Day. They'd been horrified and humbled in equal measure. But the gesture meant something. Meant they weren't invisible anymore. Weren't forgotten. The mailbox at the end of the long driveway overflowed daily. Letters from around the world, people sharing their stories, people saying thank you, people saying you gave me courage. Margaret tried to answer everyone. Her hands ached from writing, but she kept going. Every letter mattered. Every story deserved acknowledgement. Then came the first test. Lisa called. Not Sarah's office phone, Margaret's new cell phone, the one she'd bought because she could afford it now, because she deserved to stay connected to the world. Margaret stared at the screen, her daughter's name flashing. She almost didn't answer, almost sent it to voicemail like Lisa had done to her for 3 years, but she'd promised a chance. And Margaret Hayes kept her promises even when others didn't. She answered. "Hello, Mum." Lisa's voice was small, fragile. "It's me." "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then Lisa said, "I want to try, to do what you asked, to show up, not for the money, for you, for Dad, because I was wrong and I want to fix it." Margaret's throat tightened. "What does that look like to you, Lisa?" "Showing up?" Lisa took a shaky breath. "It means visiting, regularly. It means calling. Not when it's convenient, but when it matters. It means listening. It means being present, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." She paused. "I'm not asking for forgiveness yet. I know I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for the chance to earn it." Margaret looked at Robert. He was listening, his face unreadable. She made a decision. "Okay." "Okay?" Lisa repeated, like she couldn't believe it. "Okay," Margaret said. "You can try. But Lisa, if you disappear again, if you miss calls or visits or make excuses, that's it. No second chance." "I understand," Lisa whispered. "Thank you. When can I come?" Margaret looked out the window. The mountains were green, the sky clear. "Next weekend. Bring the kids. If they want to come." Lisa's voice broke. "They do. They ask about you all the time. I've kept them from you and I hate myself for it." "Then don't do it anymore," Margaret said simply. Lisa promised she wouldn't. The call ended. Margaret set the phone down. Robert reached for her hand. "You think she means it?" "I don't know," Margaret said. "But I meant what I said. One chance." Robert nodded. "One chance is more than fair." James called 2 days later. His approach was different, more formal, more calculated. "Dad," he said when Robert answered, "I'd like to come visit, discuss the terms you and Mom set out." Robert's voice was cool. "It's not a negotiation, James. It's simple. Show up, be present, prove you care." James was quiet. Then, "I'm not good at this, at feelings, at being vulnerable." "You're my son," Robert said. "You shouldn't have to be vulnerable with me. You should just be yourself. That's all we ever wanted, just you, not your success, not your money, just you." James's voice cracked. "I thought I had to be successful to matter, to make you proud." Robert closed his eyes, pain flooding through him. "We were proud of you when you learned to tie your shoes, when you made the baseball team, when you graduated high school. We didn't need you to be rich or important. We needed you to be ours." The silence on the line was heavy. Then James said, "I'd like to try to remember that, to be that again, if you'll let me." Robert looked at Margaret. She nodded. "Come Sunday," Robert said. "Come for dinner. We'll start there." James agreed, sounded almost relieved, like he'd been waiting for permission to stop performing, to stop pretending he had it all figured out. Patricia didn't call. A letter arrived instead, formal, typed, on law firm letterhead, even though she was still on leave. "Dear Mother and Father," it began. "I've spent the last 6 months in therapy, working through why I behaved the way I did, why I abandoned you. My therapist says I have attachment issues, that I prioritize achievement over connection, that I'm afraid of appearing weak or needy." She went on for 2 pages, clinical, detached, analyzing herself like a case study. Margaret read it twice, handed it to Robert. He read it, set it down. "What do you think?" Margaret asked. "I think she's still hiding," Robert said, using fancy words to avoid real feelings. Margaret agreed. But at the end of the letter, Patricia had written something different, something rawer. "I don't know if I can be who you need me to be. I don't know if I know how, but I want to learn. If you'll teach me. I'm afraid you'll reject me. afraid I've burned everything down. But I'm more afraid of living the rest of my life knowing I never tried. Please let me try." Margaret felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. Patricia was scared, truly scared. And fear, Margaret knew, made people do terrible things, but it also made them capable of change, if they were brave enough. She wrote back, by hand, on simple paper. "Dear Patricia, come home. We'll figure out the rest together. Mom." She mailed it that afternoon. Didn't tell Robert. Wanted it to be her choice, her olive branch, her risk. The following weekend, Lisa arrived. She drove up the mountain road in a minivan, emerged with her 2 children, a boy of 12 and a girl of 8, Margaret's grandchildren, the ones she'd never really known. They were shy at first, hung back behind their mother, but Margaret didn't push, just smiled, said hello, offered cookies she'd baked that morning. Robert came out slowly. His health had improved with proper medication and regular doctor visits. He looked stronger, more alive. The kids stared at him. "Grandpa?" the boy asked. Robert's eyes filled with tears. "Yeah, buddy. I'm your grandpa." The boy walked forward, looked up at him. "Mum says we haven't visited because she was sick, but she's better now, so we can come now, right?" Margaret's heart broke. Lisa had lied to them, protected herself, made it sound like illness instead of choice. But at least she'd brought them. At least they were here. "Right," Margaret said. "You can come now." The little girl, Sarah, named after her mother's sister, tugged Margaret's sleeve. "Are you really rich? Other kids at school said you found treasure like pirates." Margaret knelt down. "We found something valuable," she said, "but the real treasure is getting to meet you." Sarah considered this seriously. "Can I see the treasure?" Margaret smiled. "Maybe later. First, how about we have lunch?" They ate on the porch, sandwiches and lemonade. The kids asked questions about the cabin, about the mountains, about the bears Robert swore he'd seen last week. Lisa watched quietly, tears streaming down her face, watching her children with her parents, watching what she'd denied them all, denied herself. After lunch, the kids explored outside with Robert. Lisa and Margaret sat on the porch steps, alone for the first time in 4 years. "I'm so sorry," Lisa said. "I know I keep saying it, but I am. I look at them with you and I see what I stole. From everyone." Margaret didn't respond right away. "Then why?" Lisa wiped her eyes. "I was ashamed. Of what? Of not being enough, of struggling, of being divorced and broke and barely holding it together. I thought if you knew how bad things were, you'd be disappointed." Margaret turned to her, looked her daughter in the eyes. "Lisa, I was a single mother working double shifts while your father rebuilt engines for next to nothing. We were broke for 20 years. Did you think I'd judge you for struggling?" Lisa shook her head. "I wasn't thinking. I was just surviving. And somewhere in the survival, I forgot what mattered." "Forgot who mattered?" Margaret took her daughter's hand. "You matter. You always mattered. Success or failure, rich or poor, you're my daughter. That doesn't change." Lisa collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbed like a child. Margaret held her, stroked her hair the way she used to when Lisa was small and scared of thunderstorms. They sat like that for a long time. Healing wasn't fast, but it could start. With touch, with tears, with truth. When Lisa finally pulled back, she said, "I want to come every weekend, if you'll have me. I want the kids to know you. I want to know you again." Margaret nodded. "Then come. The door's open." "But Lisa." Lisa met her eyes. "Don't disappear again." "I won't," Lisa promised. "I swear on everything I have left, I won't." Sunday came. James arrived in a rental car. No suit this time. Jeans and a sweater. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd forgotten how to dress casually. He brought flowers, roses from the grocery store in town, handed them to Margaret awkwardly. I didn't know what else to bring." "They're perfect," Margaret said. Robert shook his son's hand. The formality between them was painful. They were strangers relearning how to be family. Dinner was simple: roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables from the garden Margaret had started. They ate quietly at first. Then Robert asked about James's kids. James pulled out his phone, showed pictures, talked about his eldest daughter who wanted to be an engineer, his son who played soccer, his youngest who loved dinosaurs. His voice softened when he talked about them, became genuine, became dad instead of executive. "Do they know about us?" Margaret asked. James set his phone down. "They know I have parents. They don't know I've been a terrible son." His voice was heavy with shame. "I told them you lived far away, that visits were hard. More lies to cover the truth." Robert leaned forward. "Bring them next time. Let them meet their grandparents before it's too late." James looked up. "Next time. If you want there to be one," Robert said. James nodded quickly. "I do. I really do. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to try. To be better. To be present." His voice broke. "I'm so tired of pretending I don't need anyone. Of acting like I have it all together when I'm falling apart." Margaret saw her son then, really saw him. Not the successful businessman. Not the disappointing child. Just a man who'd built walls so high he'd trapped himself inside. "James," she said gently, "you don't have to be perfect. You never did. We just wanted you to be ours." James put his face in his hands, wept, deep, wrenching sobs. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I missed so much. I wasted so much time." Robert moved around the table, put his hand on his son's shoulder. "Then we don't waste any more." James looked up at his father, red-eyed, broken open. "Okay? Okay." They finished dinner quietly, the conversation lighter. James told stories about work disasters, about the time his presentation file corrupted minutes before a board meeting, about the co-worker who microwaved fish every day. They laughed, actually laughed, and for the first time in years, James looked like their son again. Patricia came 3 weeks later. She arrived alone. No lawyer, no fancy car. She'd borrowed a friend's Honda, wore yoga pants and a sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. She looked younger, more vulnerable, more real. Margaret answered the door. They stood looking at each other. Patricia's chin trembled. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet," Margaret said. "Just come in." They sat in the living room. Robert joined them. The silence was awkward, thick. Finally, Patricia said, "I've been talking to Lisa. She told me about her visits, about bringing her kids. I don't have kids, don't have an excuse to be here except that I want to be." "That's reason enough," Robert said. Patricia looked at him. "I hurt you both so much. I was cruel. I was selfish. I thought my career mattered more than people, more than you. And now I've lost the career anyway, lost everything. Because I didn't have a foundation, didn't have love. Just ambition and fear." Margaret asked quietly, "What are you afraid of, Patricia?" Patricia's voice shook. "Being ordinary, being forgettable, being like." She stopped. "Being like what?" Robert prompted. Patricia looked at her mother. "Being like you, working some job you hated, struggling, being invisible. I wanted more. I wanted to matter." The words hung in the air like accusations. Margaret felt the sting, but she also understood. "I did work jobs I hated," she said. "I did struggle. But I was never invisible, Patricia. Not to the people who mattered, not to your father, not to the people at the diner who knew my name, not to the neighbors who checked on us. Maybe I was invisible to you, but that says more about where you were looking than where I was standing." Patricia's face crumpled. "You're right. God, you're right. I was so busy looking up, climbing higher, I never looked at what I was standing on, who I was standing on." She wiped her eyes. "I don't know how to fix this, how to be different." Robert said, "You start by showing up, by being honest, by stopping the performance." Patricia nodded, took a shaky breath. "Okay, honesty. I'm broke. I lost my job. My firm asked me to resign, said I was a liability. I'm living with a friend, sleeping on her couch. I have nothing. Nothing except the realization that I destroyed the only relationships that actually mattered. She looked at them both. I'm not here for money. I know you think I am. Maybe I would have been 6 months ago. But I'm here because I'm terrified of becoming what Samuel Brennan was, dying alone with a fortune and no one to care. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. Patricia, she said softly, we don't want your success. We want you. Just you. Messy, broke, imperfect. We want our daughter. Not some corporate version, not some polished image. Just Patricia, the girl who used to bring us dandelions and call them fancy flowers. Patricia laughed through tears. I remember that. You put them in a vase like they were roses. Because to us they were, Margaret said. Because you picked them. That made them priceless. Patricia stood suddenly, walked to her mother, knelt in front of her. I want to be that girl again. The one who thought dandelions were fancy. Who thought you two were everything. Please help me find her again. Margaret pulled her daughter close. We will, baby. We will. The months that followed were hard, beautiful, messy, real. Lisa came every weekend, brought the kids. They learned to fish in the stream with Robert, learned to bake with Margaret, learned their grandparents' stories, learned they were loved. James came twice a month, brought his family once. His kids were awkward at first, but warmed up. His wife, who Margaret had met only once before at the wedding 15 years ago, cried when she saw the cabin, told Margaret she'd wanted to visit, that James had always made excuses, that she was glad they were finally here. Patricia came when she could, found a job in town, nothing fancy, receptionist at a medical clinic, took an apartment above the hardware store, small, cheap, perfect. She started having dinner at the cabin once a week, started calling just to talk, started asking Margaret for advice about things that had nothing to do with money. The foundation came together slowly. Margaret had known from the beginning that she wanted to use the money for something bigger than herself. Sarah helped her establish the Forgotten Elders Fund, a non-profit dedicated to helping abandoned seniors. They bought properties, renovated them into affordable housing, hired staff who actually cared, created community centers where isolated elderly could gather, have meals, have purpose, have connection. They funded medical care for those who couldn't afford it, funded transportation, funded dignity. Margaret insisted on visiting every location, talking to every resident, learning every story. She wasn't a checkbook, she was a witness, a reminder that someone saw them, someone cared. The media covered it extensively. Elderly couple uses fortune to help others like them. Margaret gave interviews, spoke plainly, said the same thing every time. Money doesn't fix loneliness, connection does. We're not saving people with cash, we're saving them with attention, with care, with the message that they matter. The foundation grew. Other wealthy donors contributed, inspired by Margaret's story, by her authenticity, by the fact that she could have spent the money on mansions and yachts, but chose to spend it on people everyone else had forgotten. Within a year, the Forgotten Elders Fund operated in 12 states, helped thousands, and every single recipient received a handwritten note from Margaret. Brief, personal. You are seen. You are valued. You matter. The cabin became something of a pilgrimage site. People showed up uninvited, wanting to meet Margaret and Robert, wanting to see the place where the miracle happened. At first it was intrusive, overwhelming, but Sarah helped them set boundaries. One day a month, they opened the cabin for tours. Small groups, donations went to the foundation. Margaret would tell the story. Show Samuel Brennan's museum room, talk about treasure and loneliness and second chances. Robert would show the root cellar, now clean and organized. A historical site. People would cry, hug them, say thank you for giving us hope. Margaret never got used to it, never felt like a hero, just a woman who'd found money and tried to do something good with it. 1 year to the day after the court ruling, Margaret and Robert held a gathering at the cabin. They called it a family meeting, invited their children, their grandchildren, Sarah, Lorraine, the mayor, the people who'd become family when blood wasn't enough. The cabin was full, laughter bouncing off walls, kids running through rooms, the smell of food cooking, the warmth of connection. Margaret stood on the porch watching through the window. Robert joined her, put his arm around her waist. "You did good, Maggie." "We did good," she corrected. He smiled. "Yeah, we did." She leaned into him, thought about the year, about Lisa who'd kept her promise, visited every weekend, called multiple times a week, brought the kids for summer sleepovers, who'd become a daughter again. Thought about James, who came less often but came honestly, who'd brought his family for Christmas, who'd cried while decorating the tree because he remembered doing it as a child, who was trying, really trying. Thought about Patricia, who'd surprised them all, who'd moved to town, who stopped by randomly, who'd started volunteering at the foundation, who'd found purpose in service instead of status, who smiled more, laughed easier, lived smaller and felt bigger. Inside, someone called for a toast. They gathered, glasses raised. Lisa spoke first. "To Mom and Dad, who taught us that it's never too late to come home. If you're brave enough to walk through the door," James added. "To second chances, and parents who love us even when we don't deserve it." Patricia's voice shook. "To finding what matters, before it's too late." They drank. Then Margaret raised her glass. "To Samuel Brennan, who hid a fortune but left us something more valuable, a reminder that wealth without connection is just metal and paper. But connection, love, family, that's the real treasure. And you don't find it in a cellar, you build it, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one person at a time." The room erupted in agreement. Margaret caught Sarah's eye, mouthed, "Thank you." Sarah smiled, nodded, understood. After dinner, as the sun set over the mountains, Margaret found herself alone in the small museum room, looking at Samuel Brennan's photograph. He'd been handsome, serious eyes, strong jaw. She wondered what his life had been like, what had driven him to hide millions instead of spend them, what loneliness looked like from the inside of his days. "I hope you don't mind," she said to the photograph, "that we used your money differently than you might have intended. I hope wherever you are you can see that it's changing lives, giving people hope, making sure no one else dies alone like you did." She touched the frame gently. "Thank you, Samuel, for saving it, for hiding it, for making it possible for us to be found when we were lost." Robert appeared in the doorway. "You talking to dead people now?" She smiled. "Just saying thanks." He walked over, stood beside her. "You think he'd be happy with what we've done?" "I think he'd be relieved," Robert said, "that his life's work finally mattered to someone." They stood together, two old people who'd been thrown away and found something worth more than money. Found purpose, found worth, found themselves. Outside, the party continued. Grandchildren played, children laughed, friends shared stories. The cabin that had been silent for 40 years was full of life, full of love, full of proof that broken things could be repaired, that abandoned people could be reclaimed, that it was never too late for a new beginning. Margaret thought about the moment she'd lifted that trapdoor, how terrified she'd been, how hopeless, how ready to give up. She'd thought she was looking for shelter, maybe firewood, something to survive another day. Instead, she'd found a reason to live, not the money itself, but what the money represented, value, worth. The universe saying you matter, your life matters, your story isn't over. Weeks later, Margaret received a letter, forwarded through the foundation. The return address was a nursing home in Oregon. She opened it carefully. "Dear Mrs. Hayes, my name is Dorothy. I am 83 years old. I have 3 children who have not visited me in 7 years. I thought I was alone. that I deserved to be forgotten. Then I saw your story, saw you stand up to your children, saw you demand to be valued, saw you use your blessing to help others. You gave me courage. I called my children, told them the same thing you did. 1 year, prove you care, or I'm leaving everything to charity. 2 of them hung up. But my youngest daughter, she came, she cried, she apologized. She's been visiting every week for 3 months. We're rebuilding something I thought was dead, and it's because of you. Because you showed me that being a parent doesn't mean accepting crumbs. It means expecting love, demanding respect, knowing our worth. Thank you. You saved my life, not with money, with courage. Margaret read the letter 3 times, showed Robert. They both cried. This is why, she said, this is why it all happened. Not so we could be rich, so we could show people they deserve better. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She walked outside. The mountain air was cold and clean. Stars blazed overhead in impossible numbers. She thought about the journey, from the freezing apartment to the eviction notice, to the desperate drive up the mountain to the frozen window she'd broken to get inside, to the trapdoor to the cellar, to the money, to the media, to the courtroom, to the children returning to the foundation, to this moment, standing under stars, feeling whole. She thought about all the people who'd told her to forgive her children immediately, to not make them work for it, to just be grateful they came back. But she'd held firm, because forgiveness without accountability was just enabling. And she'd done enough of that, spent enough years making excuses for them, taking the blame for their absence, wondering what she'd done wrong. She knew now. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd just loved people who weren't ready to love her back, and that wasn't her failure. It was theirs. But they were learning, growing, changing, and she was letting them. Because that's what second chances meant, not erasing the past, but building a different future. Robert joined her outside. Couldn't sleep either? She shook her head. Too much gratitude bouncing around in my brain. He laughed. I know the feeling. They stood together in comfortable silence. Then Robert said, You know what I realized today? What? We're not victims anymore. We were for a long time. Victims of circumstance, of abandonment, of poverty, of age. But we're not anymore. Now we're just 2 people who survived something hard and came out different. Better. Margaret considered that. You're right. We're not the same people who drove up this mountain a year ago. No, Robert agreed. Those people were giving up. We're people who found reasons to hold on. She kissed him, soft and sweet. 57 years of marriage, 57 years of choosing each other. I love you, Bobby. I love you, Maggie. Always have, always will. The foundation continued to grow. By the 2nd year, they'd helped over 5,000 seniors, reunited hundreds with estranged family members, provided housing, medical care, community, purpose. Margaret received letters daily, photos, stories, thank you notes written in shaky handwriting by people who'd thought no one cared. She kept every single one, filled boxes with them, read them when she felt tired, when the work felt too big, when she wondered if any of it mattered. The letters reminded her. It all mattered. Every single life touched, every single person seen. The children continued showing up. Lisa never missed a weekend, became indispensable, helped run foundation events, brought organizational skills from her nursing background, became someone Margaret relied on, trusted, loved openly again. James came monthly, brought his family quarterly, was learning to be present instead of perfect, had started therapy, was working through his need to achieve, to prove, to perform, was becoming himself. Slowly. Honestly. Patricia had become the biggest surprise. She'd thrown herself into the foundation work, found she loved direct service, loved sitting with lonely seniors, listening to their stories, being present. She'd discovered gifts she didn't know she had. Empathy, patience, compassion. Had stopped trying to be important and started trying to be useful. The transformation was remarkable. On the 2-year anniversary, the local paper did a feature. Where are they now? Margaret and Robert gave an interview, talked about the foundation, about their children, about healing. The reporter asked, "Do you regret the years your children were absent?" Margaret thought carefully. "I regret that they missed time with us, that they made choices that hurt everyone. But do I regret where we ended up? No, because if they hadn't abandoned us, we wouldn't have been desperate enough to drive up that mountain, wouldn't have found the cabin, wouldn't have discovered Samuel's treasure, wouldn't have started the foundation. Sometimes the worst things lead to the best outcomes, not because the bad things were good, but because we chose to make something meaningful from the pain." The reporter scribbled notes. "And your children? Have you forgiven them?" Margaret smiled. "Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a process, a choice you make every day. Some days are easier than others. But yes, I'm forgiving them, because they're doing the work, showing up, changing, and I'm letting them. Because holding on to anger only hurts me, not them. Letting go sets everyone free." The article went viral. Again. Margaret Hayes became synonymous with grace, with boundaries, with second chances earned, with dignity reclaimed. Schools used her story in classes. Churches used it in sermons. Therapists used it with clients. She became a symbol. But she never forgot she was just a person, just a woman who'd been broken and found a way to heal. 3 years after the discovery, Margaret woke up to find Robert still asleep beside her, his breathing even and peaceful. She watched him. This man who'd stood beside her through everything, who'd never given up, never stopped loving her, never stopped believing they mattered. His health had stabilized. The money had bought him the best medical care, the best medications. But more than that, the purpose had given him a reason to stay healthy, to stay alive. He had grandchildren to know, a foundation to support, a wife to love, reasons, so many reasons. She slipped out of bed quietly, made coffee, walked onto the porch. The mountains were purple in the dawn light, mist hung in valleys, somewhere a bird sang. The world was waking up, and so was she, every day. Waking up to possibility, to purpose, to the knowledge that her life meant something, not because of money, because of choice, because she'd chosen to matter, chosen to fight, chosen to demand better, chosen to build something good from something hard. Sarah's car pulled up the driveway, early for her. Margaret waved. Sarah climbed out holding a folder, big smile on her face. "You're not going to believe this," Sarah called. "What?" "We just got our biggest donation yet, $20 million, from an anonymous donor." Margaret's jaw dropped. $20 million? Sarah nodded. Came with a note. Said they were inspired by your story, wanted to help expand the foundation nationally. Margaret sat down hard on the porch steps. Sarah sat beside her. "Maggie, do you realize what this means? We can help tens of thousands more people. Open facilities in every state, create a national network, actually change how this country treats its elders." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Samuel's money just keeps giving." Sarah put her arm around her. "Because you're using it right, using it the way it was meant to be used, to connect people, to heal wounds, to remind everyone that every life has value." Robert emerged, saw them sitting together, saw Margaret's tears. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," Margaret said. "Everything's right." Sarah explained about the donation. Robert whistled. "Well, damn. Guess we better get to work." They spent the morning planning. Calls were made, meetings scheduled. The foundation was about to expand beyond anything they'd imagined. But in the middle of it all, Margaret stopped. Looked around the cabin, at the life they'd built, at the people they'd become, at the good they were doing, and she felt it, the thing she'd been missing for so many years. Peace, not happiness. That was too simple, too fleeting. Peace. The deep knowledge that her life meant something, that she'd taken her pain and turned it into purpose, that she'd been thrown away and had rebuilt herself into something stronger. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. A historian from the University of Montana arrived. A young woman named Dr. Eleanor Marsh. She'd been researching Samuel Brennan's life, asked if she could share what she'd found. Margaret invited her in, made tea. They sat at the kitchen table while Dr. Marsh opened her laptop. "I've spent 2 years researching Samuel Brennan," she began, "and I finally found his story. Samuel was born in 1928, grew up poor in Butte, went into mining at 16, worked the copper mines for 30 years, never married, no close family, but he had a gift for finding ore, found veins other miners missed, made some money, invested it, made more." Margaret leaned forward. "Why did he hide it all?" Dr. Marsh pulled up a document. "I found his personal journals, donated to a historical society by a distant cousin who didn't know about the cabin. Samuel wrote extensively about loneliness, about watching his co-workers spend their money on family, on children, on connection. He had none of that, felt he didn't deserve it, thought he was too rough, too uneducated, too damaged by the mines." She paused. "He wrote that money became his companion, his purpose, but also his prison. He was afraid if people knew he had wealth, they'd only want him for that. So he hid it, lived simply, died alone, exactly as he feared." Robert shook his head. "That's the saddest thing I've ever heard." Dr. Marsh nodded. "But here's what I think he'd want you to know." She pulled up a final journal entry, dated 3 days before Samuel died. It said, "I have everything and nothing, wealth beyond measure and no one to share it with. If there is a God, I pray he sends this fortune to someone who understands connection matters more than collection. Someone who will use it to build what I destroyed. Bridges instead of walls, family instead of isolation. Let my failure become someone's redemption. Let my loneliness purchase someone else's love." Margaret's hands trembled. She looked at Robert, then at Sarah, then back at the historian. He knew. Somehow he knew someone like us would find it. Dr. Marsh smiled. "I think he hoped that his life's work would mean something after he was gone, that his loneliness would serve a purpose. And looking at what you've built," she gestured around the cabin, "I think he'd say his prayer was answered." Margaret excused herself, walked to the museum room, stood in front of Samuel's photograph, tears streaming down her face. "We heard you, Samuel," she whispered. "We understood, and we're making sure you didn't suffer for nothing. Your loneliness is healing thousands. Your isolation is creating connection. Your fear is becoming other people's courage. Rest easy. You mattered. You still matter." That evening, Margaret gathered everyone. Lisa, James, Patricia, their families, Sarah, Dr. Marsh, Lorraine, the mayor, all the people who'd become part of this strange, beautiful story. She stood in the center of the living room. "I learned something today," she said, "about why we found what we found, about why Samuel hid what he hid. It wasn't random. It wasn't luck. It was a prayer sent forward through time, a hope that his pain would mean something. And it does. Every person we help, every family we reunite, every elder we remind that they matter. That's Samuel's legacy, not the money, the meaning." She looked at her children. "And it's our legacy too. We were abandoned. We were forgotten. We almost gave up, but we didn't. And now we're making sure no one else has to feel that way. That's what this family is now. Not perfect, not without scars, but present, trying, building something bigger than ourselves." Lisa stood. "Mum, I want to quit my job in Seattle, move here, work for the foundation full-time, if you'll have me." Margaret's heart swelled. "We'll have you." James cleared his throat. "I've been thinking. My company is opening a Montana office. I requested the transfer. It got approved today. I'll be 2 hours away instead of 2 states. Patricia added, "I already live here, but I want to make it official. I want to join the foundation board, help it grow, use my legal skills for something that actually matters. Margaret looked at Robert. He was crying. So was she. So was everyone in the room. This is what we prayed for, Margaret said. Not money. This, family. Real family. Chosen and biological. People who show up, who care, who build instead of take. She raised her glass. To Samuel Brennan. To second chances. To the truth that it's never too late to come home. To the knowledge that we all deserve to be loved, to matter, to be seen. Everyone drank. And in that moment, in that cabin that had held so much loneliness for so many years, love finally filled every corner. The ghosts were gone. The silence was broken. Life had returned. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to stand their ground and brave enough to speak the truth. As the morning sun warmed the stone walls of the cabin, Margaret Hayes didn't reach for Samuel Brennan's ledger. She reached for her own notebook. The one where she kept track of lives changed, families reunited, elders no longer forgotten. She knew now the fight she'd stumbled into wasn't just about her. It belonged to every working-class person who'd been told to stay quiet, every woman underestimated in a world that valued youth over wisdom, every voice that had ever been buried beneath indifference and cruelty. The woman who'd once stopped for nothing had become the one who stood for everything. Because for Margaret, for Robert, for the thousands they'd helped, and for every forgotten soul still waiting to be seen, dignity was never out of reach. It just needed someone bold enough to demand it. Someone brave enough to say, "I matter." Someone strong enough to believe it. And if two abandoned seniors could find fortune in a frozen cabin and turn it into a movement that changed lives across the nation, then maybe, just maybe, anyone could find their own hidden treasure. Not in money, but in the simple revolutionary act of knowing their worth and refusing to settle for anything less. Margaret stood at the window one last time, watching her grandchildren play in the yard where Samuel once walked alone. Watching her children work together on foundation plans, watching Robert teach his grandson to split wood the right way, watching strangers become family, watching loneliness become love, watching broken become whole. And she understood, truly understood. The treasure was never in the cellar. It was always in the people, in the connections, in the choice to matter, in the courage to demand better. In the faith that even the darkest nights lead to dawn, the end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click now to keep discovering. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe the truth deserves a voice.